Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Piper Auditorium. On behalf of Hideo Sasaki Foundation, thank you so much for joining us tonight for this important conversation on design, collaboration, and the legacy of Hideo Sasaki. It's wonderful to be back at the GSD, a place that shaped my own path as a designer. Like many of you, I think, I had plenty of sleepless nights here, but I also found lifelong friends as an urban design student, so it's great to be back. It feels a little bit like home, intimidating as a home, but nonetheless home. My name is Marianne Ocampo, and I'm a principal and partner at Sasaki. I'm an associate professor of the practice at MIT Department of Urban Studies and Planning, and I also serve as the board chair for the Hideo Sasaki Foundation. This year is a milestone for us at the foundation. We have 25 years as a nonprofit organization. We're celebrating Hideo Sasaki, our namesake, and carrying forward his values. His values, especially according to the way he thought about collaboration. We do this through supporting research, where we sponsor community-led planning projects and design projects, through public programming, and through design education that expands opportunity and amplifies marginalized voices. Tonight, we want to honor Hideo's enduring impact, his ethos of broad collaboration as a model for design. We're asking, what does radical collaboration mean in today's world? In the spirit of collaboration, it's very important for us to acknowledge that we're gathered on Harvard's lands. Harvard stands on traditional and ancestral land of the Massachusetts people, whose stewardship really continues today. This evening's program is both a celebration and a provocation. We reflect on the extraordinary contributions of Hideo Sasaki as an educator here at the GSD, a practitioner, and a visionary who contributed to reshaping the role of design in academia and in practice. He served as the chair of landscape architecture here at the GSD and founded Hideo Sasaki and Associates in 1953. Hideo believed the challenges of our world were too complex for any one discipline to solve alone. He pioneered a collaborative model of practice that brought together landscape architecture, planning, architecture, alongside science, ecology, and really the social dimensions of place and space. Collaboration is something that many of us value, but it's also not always present or recognized. That's what makes tonight's conversation really important. Do we hold collaboration as a value today in design and planning? And if so, with whom are we collaborating and for what purpose? Tonight would not be possible without the support of Harvard Graduate School of Design. Thank you, Sasaki, our sponsors, and many of our staff and colleagues who worked behind the scenes to make this possible. Thank you so much for being here and being part of this effort. For our run of show, we'll begin with a presentation by your very own Gary Hilderbrand, a renowned practitioner and academic, followed by a panel discussion with an incredible group of colleagues. Thais Away, urban landscape historian and director of architecture and landscape architecture at the University of British Columbia. Stephen Gray, director of the MAUD, the urban design program here, as well as founder of Grayscale Collaborative. Dennis Pipers, urban design principal and former president of Sasaki. And Tao Zhang, who is a landscape principal and former design chair at Sasaki. And this is just the beginning. Tonight's event will continue with another symposium, The Future of Collaborative Design, that we'll have on Friday at our Sasaki office, hosted by the foundation. We'll continue the conversation. We'll get into that a little bit later at the end of today. The future of collaborative design will carry forth a lot of the themes that we're going to hear today for Friday. So to set the stage, it is my great honor to introduce Gary Hilderbrand. Gary is the Peter Louis Hornbeck Professor of Practice in Landscape Architecture and Chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture here at the GSD. He is also the founding partner of Reed Hilderbrand. Gary's leadership as both an educator and a practitioner has shaped generations of designers. His firm's work has received numerous national and international awards, and in 2023, Gary himself was awarded the ASLA Design Medal, one of the highest honors in the field. Beyond the many accolades, Gary has dedicated much of his career to advancing the discourse of landscape architecture through his teaching here at the GSD, where I believe it's been more than 30 years, I heard a little earlier, his writing, and his reflections on both the history and the future of the discipline. He's also studied Hideo Sasaki's influence on design, including curating the 1999 Sasaki exhibition at the GSD. Tonight, Gary will reflect on that history and really connect us to the challenges we face today with climate equity and the role of collaboration. Please join me in welcoming Gary Hilderbrand.
Thank you, Marianne. Good evening, everyone. It's really a great crowd. It's fantastic. Thanks to Marianne and the board of the Sasaki Foundation, Jen, your staff. I want to thank Rebecca, my right hand, and she did a lot organizing this with the foundation, and Matt and his crew. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the GSD's Department of Landscape Architecture, now in what we can proudly say is its 125th year. Thanks, Mike. Mike is our top cheerleader. I was honored to be asked to speak tonight by way of kicking off with tonight's great panel of speakers, Friday's symposium on the future of collaboration and design. Before I launch my talk, I want to acknowledge the immense and tragic loss of our dear friend and alum, Kongen Yu, just a week ago. Beyond his infinite global impact, Kongen was seriously devoted to the school and the department, and deeply loyal to many of us on the faculty here. We were planning on seeing him this October in Gund Hall, this November in Barcelona, in December at USC, and here again in Gund in February. We will honor him, but the loss is, I can tell you, deeply felt, and I know this is true discipline-wide because of such immense impact. But we'll honor his legacy and his unsurpassable gifts to the discipline of landscape architecture. 40 years ago this month, I joined Sasaki Associates as a young designer, fresh out of graduate studies here at Harvard. I stayed for 6 years. I had the very good fortune of working primarily with 3 of the partners, Ken Bassett and Perry Chapman and Stu Dawson. While we didn't work together, there was another one, Alan Ward, who was an incredible mentor to me on so many things, not just photography, believe me. So I gained a lot in those years. From Ken Bassett, I learned the art of listening, grasping a sense of the meeting, strategizing next steps, and on long drives back from meetings at Vassar College, where we worked together for 3 years, I think I became equipped with the tools of the meeting debrief. Those are long drives. And the developing narrative arc of a project as a driver for collaboration. Perry Chapman conveyed to me the beauty and power of words and narrative. His landmark study of colonial Williamsburg, which I read in, I think, my 2nd or 3rd week at Sasaki, still stands out to me for its narrative strength and the beauty of making compelling arguments with eloquent words that matter. With Stu Dawson, it was the love of engagement and the careful working over of a design logic. So I learned to practice in those years, and it surely propelled me both as a teacher and a designer and a firm leader. I'm grateful. Ken was ever persuasive in hiring me and patient with my seeming inability to delegate to younger staff. I didn't comport well with the project manager, project designer model. I wanted control of both. It wasn't that I wasn't collaborative, but rather that I wanted the design and management work for myself, and I didn't see a division between them. Later, I would learn from my partner, Doug Reed, confessions here, that I could get a whole lot more done and deliver more fully on my promises if I trusted my colleagues without fully controlling them. I tell this by way of relating my real interest tonight. It's in the intersection between advancing the artistry and expression in the work, on the one hand, and on the other, advantaging the collaborative nature Hideo Sasaki emphasized for the discipline. Now, you know, Melanie Simo, who's one of our most erudite and eloquent chroniclers of landscape architecture practice, especially in the full dimensions of modernist practice, opens her book with Pete Walker on Hideo Sasaki's offices. Actually, it's Melanie's book. And there were several offices, as we know. We'll get into that. With this trio of brief quotes from Hideo. This is the opening. It's in the preface, I think, of the book. The offices of Hideo Sasaki. We were constantly doing things we'd never done before. A very exciting period. A searching culture. Very few words, this man, but powerful words. They convey a lot. In part, they reflected an optimism in that time. Space, the arts under the Kennedy administration, optimism in spite of the horror of Kennedy's assassination. And again, Melanie is so well-spoken, I can't really do justice to that, but I think this optimism was met with a reckoning that there were big challenges, and I'll speak more about that. Love these photographs. I did a bit of research to probe my interest in the relationship between collaboration and design expression. I had a long talk with Pete Walker, who was one of Hideo's early partners and the design leader for decades of a whole branch of Hideo's legacy, Sasaki Walker Associates, later SWA, onto PWP, Peter Walker Partners. I was sure that Pete would like the question. Well, he did. He had a lot to say. First, he confirmed a hunch for me. Back in the 90s, as Marianne said, as a young teacher and researcher here, I curated a show in Gund Hall called Modernism, Interdisciplinarity, and Landscape, the Sasaki Harvard Years, utilizing material from the Sasaki archives and from our own special collections here in the Loeb Library. Ostensibly, I was interested in the intersection of Hideo's teaching and his practice. I was a young practitioner who was trying to figure out how to teach. That was interesting to me. And I'll come back to this point toward the end of the talk. What I want to say, though, through this work, through the work of that research, I came to hold the view that principal and professor and department chair Sasaki was more a strategist and an orchestrator than he was a designer. That's not a criticism, and I'm willing to be corrected if anybody wants to try. Pete readily confirmed this view, saying, quote, "Hid was a big picture guy. He knew he could find design talent at GSD and elsewhere, but he was naturally and consistently the strategic leader." Through Pete's telling of stories on projects and his remarkably clear memories of the work and the firms, he doesn't forget a thing. He brought me to a more nuanced understanding of Hideo's strengths and his predilections. They worked closely together for only a few years, 1958 to 1963, but those were incredibly formative years. This long quote from Invisible Gardens captures it well. And I can't top Melanie's great summation. Quote, excuse me, "Disciplined, highly intelligent, trained in business management as well as in landscape architecture and the fine arts," parentheses, Hideo studied business administration and minored in art at UCLA as an undergraduate, before taking a BFA in landscape architecture from Illinois. Continuing on with the quote, "Sasaki understood the workings of complex organizations and the people who achieved positions of power within them. He also appreciated the contributions of natural scientists and others to landscape architecture. Collaboration and teamwork were methods used not only by his Bauhaus-trained and influenced colleagues, but also by his clients. Among them, the most successful American corporations and eminent institutions of the day. In short, Sasaki arrived on the academic scene and in the boardroom at a time when a disciplined, skillful manager-critic of broad and deep cultivation was much needed and appreciated, end quote. Kind of says it all. In this vein, Sasaki saw the need for leadership in tackling these compound design and planning problems beyond the traditional architect lead. In his view, the age-old paradigm as the architect as master builder would not prevail. His colleague, Walter Gropius, would never give that up. But in the face of the attending complexities he saw on the horizon, rebuilding in the post-war condition, the flight from cities and the expansion of suburban development, the growth of affluence and corporate dominion, and the ascendancy of American political power all coming together in that period of the late 50s and 60s. The detailed collaboration narrative has a lot to do, according to Pete, with the New York and Chicago offices of SOM, and what Sasaki learned in those offices about practice structure, office culture, and methods of collaboration. Because there weren't many landscape architecture firms doing the kind of work he was keen to tackle, he worked first at SOM in New York just after his graduation from Harvard. The same year, 1948, when he was offered a job teaching with his mentors, including Stanley White at the University of Illinois, he moved there to teach, and he attached himself to Chicago office of SOM. It's common legend that Sasaki saw the layered and hierarchical model of practice at SOM with a project design lead and a management lead as one that could be adapted to build capacity for large and complex design and planning problems. Melanie Saimo is well-spoken on Hideo's grasp of the complexity of the challenges ahead with vast population growth, massive urban renewal in cities, the expansion of campuses. Think, for instance, of the state university systems such as University of Colorado and SUNY Buffalo. He saw all these as demanding teams with highly differentiated skills, and he wanted to be the curator. Once ensconced back in Watertown, teaching at GSD, beginning in 1950, and working with former students Peter Walker, Stu Dawson, Marv Edelman, Don Olson, Hideo hustled work with the partners of SOM, whom we knew very well, and other noted architects who had mostly been working with Dan Kiley. And in 1960, Sasaki hired the first architect to build out the disciplinary lineup, that's Ken DeMay. Soon after, a planner, Dick Galehouse, who we're honored by his presence tonight, and then others, building the team to meet the challenge. It's the period of the late 50s that I want to return to for the question of expressive strength being delivered in a collaborative team setting. Pete Walker contends that it was the collaboration of Isamu Noguchi with Gordon Bunshaft at Connecticut General Life Insurance Company in Bloomfield, Connecticut, that set the high modernism bar and became the paradigm to emulate. Pete said, we were competing with this. This was completed in 1954, 1 year after Lever House by Gordon Bunshaft, with Noguchi, though Noguchi didn't implement the project. So I knew this project well because I worked on the campus for the expansion in the early 1980s, before I came to graduate school. It is one magnificent work. Sasaki and Walker would spend days at a stretch in conference rooms in the SOM studio of Bruce Graham, a protege of Gordon Bunshaft. Pete says they were doing their best to outdo Bunshaft and Noguchi at Connecticut General, and they kind of got it here. This is Upjohn. It's always just been one of my very favorite images. Since Bruce Graham needed to please Bunshaft, the senior partner, the entire team was with them on the landscape expression in 7 courtyards and the open landscape of the campus. So with this example, it's really beautiful. I want to claim that Sasaki was supportive of the expressive agenda, but not directive. Pete Walker and Larry Wahlquist and Mas Kinoshita had the freedom to push the language of sculpture, rock, earth, plants, and water. And the corporate barons accepted this as a part of their identity. That's how persuasive it was. For Walker, Sasaki's encouragement helped hone a lifelong passion that produced the amazing body of work by SWA and the firm we know as PWP. By the way, I recently completed a renewal of the public realm spaces of Lever House on Park Avenue in New York, just last year. A project by Bunshaft and Noguchi, as I mentioned, in the same year, a year after Connecticut General. A year before, rather. Noguchi's plan was not built, but you can see the model and look at Noguchi looking into the model. So this went all the way to CDs, and we don't know why, but for some reason it was scrapped. Could not get to the bottom of that. And then on the right, you can see what it looks like today. With that conceit, this beautiful conceit of the planter coming into the lobby. Let's return to firm structure. Here again, Melanie Simo is explicit and thorough on the sequence of firms from Sasaki Novak, well, Sasaki and Associates first, then Sasaki Novak, then to Sasaki Walker and Associates, to Sasaki Walker and DeMay in 1963, and on to Sasaki Associates in 1975. That's 50 years ago. Legacy. I'd like to emphasize a part of this that I didn't quite get to work out in the 90s study, but with Pete's help, I can now assert it more strongly. It's my belief, and maybe it's obvious to others here tonight, maybe not, that Hideo's model looked less like SOM's structure and more like the organization of the Graduate School of Design. Since its inauguration in 1936, GSD had 3 departments: architecture, landscape architecture, and city and regional planning. The latter being changed to Department of Urban Planning and Design in 1985, but importantly, Dean Jose Luis Sert established in 1960 a one-of-a-kind program in urban design exclusively for students with a prior professional degree in design. So for Sasaki, in these departments, one found the specializations that closely aligned with the kind of collaborative teams that he knew were needed in practice. Urban design captured a whole lot of what he stood for. It was necessarily collaborative, required many specializations, it required analytics, one of his strengths. It involved population dynamics, traffic engineering, utilities and infrastructure, phasing, and so much more, finance. And he introduced ecology to urban design in the 50s, long before anyone had. Evidence of this elision between the design school and the practice is abundant. For nearly 2 decades, Sasaki participated in collaborative studios at MIT and at Harvard. Guests in the department include Ed Bacon on cities, Donald Appleyard on visualization of urban phenomena, Kevin Lynch on sensing and adaptability, Victor Olgay on climate and microclimate, here. Actually in Robinson Hall, across the way. Along with all the outstanding designers in the Sasaki office. My source, Pete Walker, says the line between the office and the school was wholly perforated, very fluid. Some days it seemed as if the 2 enterprises were one. And the first chapter of Dick Galehouse's excellent new book really bears this out. Oops. Here's a quote from the 1999 exhibition brochure. In both the office and the school, Sasaki argued for systemic and thorough kind of research that would yield comparative criteria and useful indices on the climate, water, soil, vegetation, wildlife, and cultural aspects of sites at all scales. He criticized comprehensive planning's tendency to restrict its focus to economic, demographic, and architectural considerations, strongly urging that the field of urban design gave increased emphasis to environmental factors. He revised curriculum, and he drew on his professional colleagues to help teach in an understaffed academic environment. The department was in fairly difficult days. Defining a model of practitioner-teacher that obviously still obtains today. Tonight's panelist, Thaisa Wei, says this, quote, Sasaki was less concerned how design was taught than with encouraging and developing critical thought, a skill he considered essential. And continuing, such a framework began with research in multiple forms, verbal, visual, and experimental, proceeded to analysis, and resulted finally in synthesis. And now here is Sasaki, in 1950, 2 years out of graduate school. Quote, the profession of landscape architecture and the schools perpetuating it stand at a critical fork in the road. One fork leads to a significant field of endeavor, contributing to the betterment of human environment, while the other points to a subordinate field of superficial embellishment. The question the profession and the schools must answer is which road shall be followed and what adjustments must be made adequately to prepare landscape architects to solve the rising problems. The need for comprehensive landscape architecture planning is not diminishing. On the contrary, it's increasing. The expansion of population and the increase of complexity of environmental organization make the need greater today than ever before in history. Does it sound familiar? Finally, to bring this discussion to the present and the future, I don't believe there's anybody in this room who believes designers and planners can go it alone, nor that one discipline has earned the privilege of leading. Let's call perpetual collaboration a baseline condition. Like Sasaki did in the 50s, let's stare down the complex problems ahead of us together. Let's collectively realize and deploy the kinds of specializations that have emerged in climate science, in technology, in public health, in human comfort and epidemiology, in material science and building science, in carbon drawdown, in the arts, and in the more than human ways that we now characterize agency in design and planning. Only in this way will we advance the work in the polycrisis of climate vulnerability and environmental justice. And I trust that the conversation this evening and on Friday will map out with stronger and clearer framing just how this will happen. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gary, for your reflections and for setting the stage for us to have this discussion. Ultimately, we want to turn to this great group of panelists to get an introduction from each of them about who they are, their work, and their interest in collaboration. So with that, we'll go ahead and start with Dennis.
Okay, a brief intro. So really interesting listening to Gary. I was educated in architecture at University of Toronto. It was very much a personal journey and discovery over there, very focused on architecture. I came to the GSD to do urban design, and that was a whole new world. And for me, it's all about the trays. The trays opened up and made transparent all these other disciplines that were hidden in Toronto. So I was exposed to landscape architects, people like Laurie Olin, Pete Walker, many, many others, planners, architects and colleague urban designers, as well as many others. So that was opening up my eyes. And then I had another university experience, which was Sasaki. I realized this afternoon, Hideo was at Sasaki for 29 years. I've been there for 37. So that is frightening. But it's been an education. And just meeting all the people, Dick and Dave and others, all the young professionals I work with, has been a whole new education that's ongoing. So I was fortunate enough to be to be elected president of Sasaki for about 8 or 9 years, and that gave me an opportunity to work closely with many people to advance the interests of the firm and our work together. And we can talk a bit more about that in the discussion.
That's a hard one to top. Thank you, Dennis. So I'm Thaisa Wei, and Director of Garden and Landscape Studies at Dumbarton Oaks. And I'm a landscape historian. I'm not a practitioner. And I came to this really interested initially in why landscapes shape us the way they do. Why does it matter, the landscapes? I grew up across the street from Central Park and knew it had helped to shape me, and I wanted to understand why. But I came over time to be even more curious about how the profession has shaped the landscapes we know, whether or not they've designed them. I actually think designers shape far broader spheres than just the places that they can claim. And then in that vein also became interested in how pedagogy, how do we learn how to be a designer? How do we learn how to be in place? And then from that on collaboration. And a lot of it has to do with thinking about how we move forward by drawing from the past. We've had a much richer and broad and experimental past than we often realize. And Hideo Sasaki is a wonderful example of somebody who has done things that we could learn from even today as we move forward. So that's my.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Tao Zhang. I'm a landscape architect and ecologist by training. I've been at Sasaki for 17 years, less frightening than Dennis' history. So it's been a really meaningful reflection for me because I spent my entire, so far, professional career at Sasaki. As Gary mentioned, to me, it's the baseline of the profession. And I just always thought that was the default. I had never even thought of any other way of practice or a single disciplinary way of thinking. So it's really meaningful for me to think about this. And in the last 6-7 years, some of my projects have demanded really deep integration of all disciplines at Sasaki, from planning, urban design, to landscape architecture, ecology, and then architecture, interior design, and graphic design. As not a phased process, it's all happening at the same time. And reflecting on that, I think that's a really interesting reflection of the collaboration or collaborative design that Sasaki has implanted in the culture of Sasaki. And Dennis and I also serve on the board of directors in the firm as the first and the second chair of design, chair of design culture. I think collaboration is deeply rooted in Sasaki culture. So I'm looking forward to the conversation today.
Good evening. I'm Stephen Gray, and I have very interesting connections with all of these people on stage. One thing I didn't realize, Gary, your history with Sasaki is like almost the same as mine. So I'm on the faculty here. I teach in urban design. When I finished school in 2008, I started at Sasaki as my first job out of graduate school and was there for 7 years. I've got 1 year on you. And Tao and I started at the same time, basically the same month when we started there. Dennis was in the interview room and deliberated on the hiring of me to Sasaki. Marianne and I met at Sasaki, and we taught at MIT. And Thais and I have been finding ways to make good trouble in collaborative ways across various interests and disciplines. So I think it's, you can see the legacy is actually sitting right in front of you. And it's really interesting to hear that past. One thing that I found really interesting was, Gary, your description of Hideo Sasaki as a kind of orchestrator, someone who was really facilitating processes, and who was taking advantage of a moment in time. And this was a moment when there were all of these major projects happening across the United States, huge federal funding, huge urban renewal projects, federal highway. And this was a moment when also the creation of the urban design program happened, which was a response to the fact that the singularity of the disciplines, in this case architecture, in that case landscape architecture, were not going to be able to confront these challenges. And we're now at a different place where we have a sort of a retreat of the federal government, and we have a whole new set of issues that are going to require a much more, to sort of use the phrase of the night, radical collaboration. So I'm excited to have this conversation.
Great. Thank you all so much. Well, building off that, Stephen, as we're reflecting on Gary's lecture about Hideo Sasaki in the 1950s and 60s, and this notion that Hideo didn't really buy into sole discipline, be it architecture as the master builder and the problem solver alone, but he rather positioned himself as a strategist who enabled design expression through collaboration. What are your all's initial reactions to the strategists?
I mean, I think that's what we need to be doing. There's so much complexity. There's so many issues. There's so many very smart and capable people that have lost a lot of their resources and their ability to operate in the way that they've been able to operate in the past with funding cuts and whatnot. And so bringing our expertise in thinking through complexity and thinking through complex problems, I think is, this is exactly what we need to be doing.
Yeah.
Go on. Yeah.
Well, I would just add to that, a piece about Sasaki, the way I got to know Sasaki is that he was really good friends with Rich Haig. When Rich went to Illinois, Sasaki was teaching that year, and the two of them took off in 1949 in an old Army Jeep and traveled really across the country to look at landscapes. But the reason that's so important to me is because I think in that strategy moment, he saw landscapes not as a project to do, but he saw a national landscape that needed the attention of a broad community. He saw issues that worked across borders. He didn't see it. It was a much bigger scale, and I think it's something that he brought into his work. And you can see him. I actually think one of the reasons, probably many reasons, he came to teach at the GSD, but one of them is Holmes Perkins had already started a couple years prior to that architecture and landscape architecture were all in the same studio the first year together, that it was jointly done. So he already saw the inklings. So I just think that his ability to think at a big scale and then come down to what would it take to do that. Does that make sense?
I think when Gary spoke about the orchestrator or a person who would encourage talented people to work together, what I think Hideo's great insight was, that continues today at our firm, is that we take on these challenging projects, in many cases projects that we have no experience in, but we do have experience in how to look at a problem through different lenses. And I can't think of a project that I've been involved in that didn't have an ecologist, that didn't have a landscape architect or a planner or in many cases, an architect. So it's not the manager designer, it's the talent and experience and knowledge that people bring to a problem through these different lenses. And that's how we get to solutions, and that's how we transcend problem solving into poetry and beauty and all those other important things that we need to think about. Process, of course, as well. So I think that is a sort of powerful insight that Hideo had all these decades ago that continues to be relevant.
I think it takes great vision to be a strategist. I mean, I shared the struggle with Gary that the division between design versus manager, and the authorship of a design. And as a designer, we all want to do more. We want to do the tangible, imprint of our own thinking. But I think you have to be humble enough and trust the team, trust the talents that you work with for a better outcome. Because I have to remind myself every day that leverage the team, leverage the resource in the firm. There's a more holistic, collective together than what you're envisioning. So I think that's a huge mindset that not every designer can practice every day.
Can I follow up on that? I'm curious, Gary, even to ask you, when I hear this and I think of Sasaki's capacity to want a collaborative group, and a truly collaborative, not just a I'll call you when I need you kind of collaboration. I think of his capacity to think so big that if design could help to address the really large issues, that would give a sense of accomplishment that any one particular beautiful moment in a landscape might not equal. Does that?
I appreciate you raising that, and also I appreciated Dennis's impulse about finding poetry in the process. I think that I have completed 4 projects with SOM in the last 6 or 7 years. They still work that way. I think Sasaki probably realized that the complexity of building demands kind of both design and management being organized hierarchically. If you just think about the amount of detail that it takes to build a project, and now we have a lot of it being automated, but back then it was all pencils and vellum, later Mylar, ink and Mylar. So I don't think that he would denigrate that, and it's still how they operate, and I have to say, it is a joy to work with SOM because they're so organized, and their delivery mechanisms are almost infallible. And, we all learn from that. But I think Hideo saw the problem set as not exactly being that. That you need if it involves buildings. I mean, how many buildings at University of Colorado? Oh, my God. You just need teams of project lead designer and lead manager. But I think that he believed that assembling the other kinds of talent, maybe management, still needed to happen outside of design or alongside design. And I was glad to hear Tao say that he never loved that model, because I didn't either.
So as we're thinking about Hideo's legacy and just historically understanding how Hideo fit within this constellation of 20th century designers, I want to hear from Thaisa and Gary. Was Hideo part of a collective? We see building upon a movement that was happening at this time that we hear about Kennedy, the space age, this hope, this optimism that is of that time. Or is he breaking away from a different realm or way of working for design?
Thais is going to have a stronger answer than I am on this because she's studied this so thoroughly. I think that Sasaki saw people in the GSD, mostly like Holmes Perkins, Reg Isaacs, and he saw Kevin Lynch at MIT and Don Appleyard, and I think he gravitated that way instead of Gropius or even Sert, because they represented a different model, a model that he didn't see working for the larger projects, the larger complexities. And to me, it was uncanny, that quote from 1950. I mean, you're still in the shadow of the war. I think it's very prescient. Now, it's partly because, he was buddies with a really brilliant man named Rich Haig, and they had both studied with Stanley White, who just was maybe the most unusual teacher in the nation. Just such a legend about culture, humanism, humanistic tendencies. He took those several students, classes were tiny, on a trip every summer. They'd leave Champaign, and they'd travel, through Pennsylvania. Maybe they'd go to Pittsburgh and Buffalo, where there were some really great design works. They would go to New York City. They would end up at his brother's place in Maine, E.B. White, the writer from The New Yorker, and of course the novelist. And so he exposed these students constantly to culture. And Hideo and Rich both grew up in that. And I think they never lost that. And then you get out of Haig, you get Frank James and Laurie Olin and Bob Hanna and a whole generation of people who also did this. So I think there was a milieu. And Sasaki was really at the center of it because, it stemmed from Stanley White.
No, I think that's right. I think it's yes and. Mm-hmm. I think that he is certainly of a time, and Gary just talked about that. Coming out of World War II, there's a sense that there are immense challenges out there that need to be addressed. But
like annihilation.
Right, absolutely. And there is a kind of optimism that, in fact, professionals are going to be able to grapple with this. He's certainly building, and I've talked to Gary about this. One of the interesting pieces in this collaborative story in the GSD is in the 20s and 30s, there's a school called Cambridge School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture for Women, and it's taught initially primarily by Harvard faculty on their off hours. Don't any of the faculty throw things at me for saying off, but that was how they did it. But at the Cambridge School, they taught collaboratively. They taught across the disciplines. They taught collaborative studios. And they would talk about, over at the Cambridge School, they could do things they couldn't do in the GSD quite yet. And I think Perkins bringing the collaborative first-year studio was a legacy of that. So there's stuff going on. But it takes a particular person to know and pull that thread, right? And build that thread and build that structure. And I would say that Sasaki saw what was good. That's why I suspect that a part of why he came to the GSD, because he was also offered, as I understand, a job at Berkeley. Stanley White would have probably loved to have him stay at Illinois. Stanley White used to play the violin in a robe in front of his class, teach him about music. So I think I think it's an and I think he built on it. He also was really, really good, not just collaborative, but he knew who to put at the table. It wasn't just a willy-nilly of, hey, who wants to come around the table, whatever. He saw talent, and sometimes he saw it in people like Rich Haig, who not everybody saw talent early on. And sometimes he saw it in people that we could all see from day one. So he was really good at that, and he brought people who could collaborate together. So I think it's a yes and. And then, yeah, he really built the firm. But I also want to say I think this collaboration piece is also really important in terms of the school and the practice. And it's something that I'm not sure we're as good today, for better or for worse, in that kind of mix. But he saw collaboration everywhere. Does that?
That really resonates. I think, part of this is, and Gary, this is addressed to you, and then I'll open it up to the other panelists, but Hideo's version of collaboration is the foundation you've mentioned in conversation for what we need now. As we think about the past and what that time was in the 50s and the 60s, and understanding where we are today in 2025 and what this means relative to the direction of planning and design for our country, and just globally as we think about Sasaki the firm and practitioners who are really designing and planning globally. But for Gary, I'll start with you. This was a foundation you have mentioned relative to what we need now, especially in the face of climate and justice crises. Why is this model so relevant today? And can you speak to his the political kind of awareness that Hideo was really anticipating as you speak to state institutions, ways that he was looking at corporations. He was essentially anticipating power and how that was playing out in the United States, and who wanted to work with designers to build an identity that would be part of their values. Can you speak to that a little more?
Thank you. Dennis said something that fits this question a little bit, which is that we do all the work we can to transcend problem solving. And I like to use the term problem seeking, and I think this was part of Sasaki's character. And by problem seeking, what I mean is that our work pretty much begins in problems that cities have, that, let's say, corporate takeovers. Connecticut General was taken over hostily. And, nobody today except for Google and Facebook are building, and Apple are building identities, physical identities, because they might get stolen from, capitalists, by capitalists. So problem seeking is looking into the initial problem and pressing on it from all ends, sort of what you said. We just look at it from every angle. And the project becomes not the problem, but a view of the future, a transformational view of the future. And somehow, this young man had that capacity, right? And we know why, because of the lineage and because of his experience as a Japanese American being interred in a camp during the war, and the people that he associated with. In every project today, whether it's the problem of expansion of a museum, for instance, or the redoing of a precinct on a campus at Harvard Business School, we just can't let the problem lie. We have to open it up and see it for what it is in the context of environmental justice and climate resiliency. We can't do anything but that. And now as the science is being challenged, I would say very inadequately, and as the federal government moves away from, large projects, excuse me, and funding of universities have to figure out another way. Every project has a focus on environmental justice and climate survival. You can't do anything but that. And these are the compelling issues, or the maybe frightening issues of our time, how hot cities are getting. We did a studio in Athens last fall. Athens is burning up, right? So One thing that I can say about curriculum is that we are front and center preparing an army of climate and justice activists. And we have to be activists in our practices. And so that's how I see it. You know, it's bringing the themes that we know are pressing to every problem, every project, and funneling our way of problem seeking through those frames, and making sure that the outcomes of projects are taking account of what's coming.
Can I add two things to your climate change and environmental justice? I think the role of capitalism and capital is also a compounding consideration, as well as an erosion of democracy. And, you know, what that means is that we as designers need to more critically engage with, as Marianne put it, with power, specifically and explicitly. The work that we do as designers, we're focused on sort of potentially three areas, right? Physical geographies, so buildings, blocks, districts, neighborhoods, cities. Relational structures, so you have park systems, transportation systems, social infrastructure, and agencies of power, because we sit at the tables, we sit in the boardrooms, and we're making decisions with the people who have the capital and have the power. And, you know, I would argue that we are not as activist as we should be in that third arena. And that's something I think that, you know, we need to be thinking about in this moment in time, is how do we engage with these agencies of power? How do we coordinate and facilitate? How do we identify, you know, these people want a return on investment and these people just want to stay in their neighborhood? And how do we coordinate a process that gets all of those issues and desires onto the table and negotiates among them so that we can actually do work and make our cities better for a broader cross-section of people? So to me, I think adding those other ones and then thinking about all of them as really an engagement directly and explicitly with power, and that we are the facilitators in those rooms, should we take that role on, is something that we should be probably focusing more on in school, in our teaching, but certainly in practice.
Yeah, I surely agree with that. Thank you for adding that, Stephen. I think your practice is one of the practices that is really pushing hard on that.
You know, I want to add to that, because I think there's also another insight, which, and you mentioned that he had brought ecology forward in a way that it hadn't been, and doing it before McCarg and some of the people we tend to assume did it. And I think he was doing it in a similar vein. He was seeing an area, a problem that needed to be addressed, and where the power lay and the knowledge lay, and trying to make sure that that knowledge, those actions were at the table. And we need to be doing the same thing of thinking about who's not at the table, what's not at the table, and what are the issues. And also his engagement with the corporate world was clearly his way.
With that said, I think that if we start to pivot towards where we are today and understanding critical reflection, critical thinking as part of the kind of practice that Hideo had, but also just understanding that through education, academia. What's wonderful with Hideo is that we're starting to blend academia and practice. A lot of you practice and teach, and understanding what are we considering as we educate designers for the next for the future. In regards to you, Stephen, you talk about we are not neutral. We're participating, perpetuating something in this world. What are we advocating for? If Hideo's advocating for environmentalism and ecology and landscape, what is it that we are doing today in education, academia, that is starting to really dismantle or think differently about collaboration in radical new ways?
We need to be doing more. I mean, I think just planting the seed, the educational experience that happens in this building with the Option Studios is sort of an early seed. Like that's the space where those kinds of conversations can happen, where people with different backgrounds, different interests, different expertise that they're developing can begin to have those conversations. But I think there's a time and a place for sort of suspending disbelief or suspending realities for a moment so that we can skill build, so that we can build our creative muscle. Like there's a place for that. But I feel like we need to have more places for the like, and this is how things work, so now let's figure it out, because I think there's less of that. And perhaps that's what you get in practice. I mean, I got, my education started with Dick Galehouse when I started at Sasaki. We would talk about a problem. It seemed like he knew the answer on the day we got the project, and that would be the answer at the end. But he would, say, think about this. He'd give me 3 days. I'd sketch around and think through something, and then he'd come by and he'd look at it. He'd walk away, and I'd come back, and there'd be a little note and a few little marks. Oh, take a look over here for a minute. He'd give me a few more days. And that kind of space to, I think, explore ideas without the constraints and the pressures is important. But we also need, I think, to then go to the client meeting and see how that really lands when we bring it to bear. So that power piece, that reality piece, maybe it could be more infused in certain ways in the creative part of the school experience, as opposed to just in the lectures or the seminars. But
yeah, I think we do that. Thanks for mentioning the studios. We do that in our core studios to a degree. Our 3 of our 4 core studios are focused on adaptation at different scales. Our option studios are looking at fire. 2 of them in California this semester. Our students are about to go and see how fire is managed or how it ravages a city. Working on extreme aridity with Lorena in Valencia. An extremely arid environment where, I forget how many people, Lorena, died last year from extreme flooding. 200. Thanks, Mike. So it gets gritty, right? I mean, and you're looking at the reality of the need for adaptation and the damage that's done environmentally and socially. And I do think that is amazing preparation. It's a hallmark of the school that we are able to do that.
I want to add a little bit. I think the context evolve, right? What Sasaki was advocating for in the 50s, in the 60s, foreseeing environmental challenges is different from what we see today. It's more extreme today. He didn't anticipate fire, natural fire, or flooding, or even the whole discourse about carbon. Right. So I think there's a lot of emerging new topics, I think, both in academia and in our practice. I always believe Sasaki is a Sasaki University. So it continues whenever, whether you have been practicing for 17 years or 37 years, that evolution never stops.
Well, and I'd like to end maybe with one more question in regards to that, Tao, for this panel. But as we think about collaboration, radical collaboration, I mean, Dennis, from your perspective, how is radical collaboration moving the practice forward at Sasaki in particular? How is that being moved forward? I think you're touching upon it, Tao. And then for the rest of the panelists, the work that you're doing in practice in academia, what is that next chapter of radical collaboration that we should be anticipating?
I mean, I was just thinking another kind of set of experiences that I've had with my colleagues and teammates. I'll give an example. At a university in Monterrey, Mexico, where I've been working with Victor and Pablo Savid, architect, and others in the office. When we started there 10, 12 years ago, it was quite conservative and hierarchical. And we were asked to make some suggestions about the library. And I went there with a fellow called Philip Parsons, who was a kind of planner, strategist, educator. He used to work at Harvard in the Arts and Science division in their properties. Anyway, he said to them, you know, we can comment on your library, but the plan of your campus is totally screwed up. And every time you add a building, you make it worse. It had a great plan in the 50s that was very ecological and environmental, and things were oriented properly. But every time they advanced the place, it got worse and worse. And so we began a process to really break down the silos that had emerged on the campus. We spoke about connectivity, we spoke about transparency, we spoke about integration. And this was across disciplines, across spaces, the relationship of the campus to the city, which until then was just a wall, a security wall. And as we've worked there and evolved our work, the place has become completely transformed through our work. And I believe that this vision that Hideo had around the impact of our work and bringing these different lenses to a problem and working with a client as a partner, not a a person that manages you as a consultant, but a genuine partner and collaborator, to see the built result of these things utterly transform an institution is quite amazing. And the power of our work and the impact that this vision could have is very significant. And it's just one small example at an institution that could project over the scale of society.
Can I add, that is such an important story, because the piece that we haven't talked about is how the collaborative work makes places for collaboration and collective being. So the capacity through collaboration to make the place for a collective future is also really critical. And I think it's part of Sasaki, but part of what we really, really, really need to do today, because we're not going to save democracy person by person. We're going to save it only as a collective.
I want to reflect a little bit on two different layers. One is within Sasaki, how to continue the collaboration. Just one small example, that the nomenclature of our landscape architecture in Sasaki, right? So that's the root of the firm. And I'm thanks to Michael here, the former chair of the practice. I think that was before pandemic. We changed the landscape architecture practice at Sasaki from side group. I don't know, Gary, when you were there, if the practice was called a side group, among within the planning departments or architecture department. And then we changed it to LECE, it stands for landscape architecture, civil engineering, and ecology. So that elevated civil engineering, our allied profession, and ecologist in the firm as equal voice at the table, and that remind everyone that they're not in-house consultant. They're not informing your design. They're part of the design solutions. I think, I'm very proud of that group, and I think that nomenclature really shows the trajectory that we're headed. And another reflection is the practice beyond, the office, or how we interact with the community we serve, how we interact with the client. So that collaboration is beyond just professional disciplines, and we've used multidisciplinary practice, cross-disciplinary practice. Recent years we've used interdisciplinary practice, but in my mind, it's more of a transdisciplinary practice. It's beyond the professions that we're familiar with, we're in, and it's more of a co-creation process with the community, with the people we serve, with the conventional wisdom that we don't have the lived experience in that space. I think that co-creative ideation process is a very, very important factor to continue that collaboration in our practice and in society as well.
Yeah, I think listening to you, Dennis, and you, Tao, and thinking about the things that you're mentioning that had made significant changes in the way that you perceived the work that you did and the way that others were able to engage it and benefit from it. I think what's interesting is that they're small things. They're little things. It doesn't take, we don't have to clear the whole table and start from scratch. We can do little things that change the way that we practice, the way that we position ourselves, the way that we position others in the work that we do, that can have, over time, significant changes not only to the people that you're working with at that moment, but to the practice itself. Because as you do something different, as you take someone from the community and bring them on the consultant team, as you take a group of people from community and you make them into the client, right? And you work with your actual paying client to switch the positions. As you do these kinds of the projects, it becomes a new baseline. You start the next project and you're pitching an idea and you're like, well, we can do this, and look at this turned out great. That's where we'll start, but what are we gonna do on this project? And each time we can add something different, we can increase the way that we do it. So just a couple of examples, working with the city of Boston on Blue Hill Avenue, we brought together a number of community-based organizations to kind of be our huddle. And we paid them the same hourly rate. Everyone on the team got the same $125, which was way low for the consultants, but it was so we could pay everyone the same per hour. And they became our huddle, and they helped us vet things before we brought them out to the public, and they sort of gave us red flags that were their red flags too, that we knew, okay, where we stand. And so then when we went after another project, the Austin Brighton neighborhood plan, and Ben, my client, is right up in the audience and was actually a Sasaki alum as well. When we went after it, we actually decided to bring the community-based organizations onto our team for our pitch. So it wasn't that we were going to create this huddle, but we actually were going to bring them as a part of the consultant team. And so that was an example of one little thing that we then innovated into one little thing, and now I won't go after another project unless someone in the community is on the consultant team. And so that becomes a standard of practice. So just, you can think about these things as little, just do this one thing. Push the envelope, take a risk. You might not get the job, but you might get the next one. And then make that your new baseline.
Amazing. That's a great one to end on. I think that we've heard, thank you all for wonderful kind of perspectives of hearing everything from Hideo Sasaki's legacy to understanding ways to grow the collaborations with a bigger circle of people beyond what we consider to be even professional allies or the client, but working with communities. With that, I want to open it up to the audience for any questions they may have for the panelists to continue the conversation. Please raise your hand. We'll have a microphone. We have some folks online. Thank you so much. Also, we'll be looking at that to see what questions there are.
Hi, my name is Maha. I work with Livable Streets Alliance, and we've worked on Blue Hill Avenue and all these fun projects. I guess my question is, like, when we talk about collaboration, one of the things that I struggle with as like someone who's like thinks like a designer, activist, and all those things is because of the way funding works and the way these projects work, sometimes like collaboration with communities ends up looking very extractive, because in that moment we want to get that design solution, and so we're huddling with them and we want something from them. But similar to like, we know what's happening with Blue Hill Avenue and so many other projects, like funding gets pulled and then you kind of like wait around, then you have to activate community again. And especially like when we're trying to build like the community and trying to bring them onto the table. I guess my question is like, what does like a continued collaboration, what it can look like? And for like designers of the future and strategists or of the future, like how can they be more democratic in their design without like being extractive? Especially to communities like when we mention like EJ communities and communities that are already like suffering so much because of what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I think when you start, first, well, there's a couple of things. One thing is it's good to work in places over and over again, So if you can, it's nice to have a practice that is national and international, but once you build some relationships in a place, like stay there and do some more work so that you can really, build even more trust and actually have that pan out into something that you can't anticipate. There was I guess another thing is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You can't talk to everybody all the time. And so, Gary, you'll remember when we were doing the Franklin Park plan, there was a moment where we were trying to create this ad hoc committee of community organizations. Our client was nervous about people calling up the mayor and saying, I wasn't called and why was this person called? So there's real political concerns here. But the result was that we were given we had compiled a list of like 300 organizations, and we were told you can either talk to everyone on this list or you can't talk to anybody on this list. And so we're like, so don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so I took that experience forward, and when I got a chance to work with the Emerald Necklace Conservancy, and we were thinking about Olmsted's bicentennial and what the Conservancy was going to do to celebrate it, because places all over the country were coming up with projects and initiatives for that. And so they, talking with them, it became clear that what they wanted to do was think about what's the 21st century version of urban ecology. It's environmental justice, of democratic exchange, it's racial justice, of, all of these things that we're thinking about. How do we translate them? And so we developed this idea of creating a committee of neighborhoods, which would be made up of organization heads from on that list, and we invited the ones that we had contacts with, and then at the first meeting, which we paid them $500 to attend 2 meetings, and we said, who's missing? Invite them, and then everyone got whatever word, they showed up if they wanted, so it was self-selecting, and then we raised money for them to actually be the deciders and the grant makers for public programs grants around the city in honor of Olmsted. And we also planned ahead because the board and the overseers some of them were nervous that they were giving up their power, and they were like, well, all our power is the money that we raise and then spend on these things. So like, what power what will we have? And so we said, okay, let's make this thing, this is a practice space. This is a one-time event, we're gonna do this thing. If it doesn't work, scrap it. Whatever works about it, let's learn from it, see what we can apply. But at that beginning stage, because I wasn't sure if it was gonna work, we got the board to agree that the chair of that committee would have now a new and permanent seat on the board. So there would be a community member, community representative on the board structure, and that if nothing else happened, we would at least have community representation there. And it ended up being successful. It's very recognized project, and now they have a permanent fundraising budgetary line item for that kind of public programming that they give the power and agency away to communities to do. So few lessons in there, but really it's like, think big and act small and let it build up.
Great. Thank you. Other questions that we might have?
Hey, good evening, folks. My name is Mike. I'm a landscape architecture student here. I'm going to direct this sort of towards Gary and Thaisa. And thinking about radical collaboration and these conversations, we've heard a lot about practice, and especially with Sasaki Foundation and their history, the work happening on the ground. But what about in our kind of proverbial roots in terms of our professional practice organizations, AIA, ASLA, AICP, all these organizations are also, I think, a part of these systems, and thinking about collaborativeness and also simultaneously these kind of silos that the industries have been stuck in. So how do we also work kind of backwards up that route to start thinking about where the collaboration comes across there as well?
Thanks, Mike. You're going to New Orleans, right? And you're going to the ASLA conference, and you're going to see this in action, because I can't speak for AIA or AICP. I do know about ULI, where you come from. I just think that the problems are so great, so big, that the professionals are recognizing that they need to do something. I mean, Stephen's finding a way to work with communities that is not extractive. He's not the only one doing it, although I think he's in the lead. We hear this all the time now, and students also raise it with us. I'll explain something about pedagogy here. We cannot afford to be extractive with communities, and so a lot of the time we are teaching the students about community engagement with staff from the BPDA, for instance, if it's in Charlestown, relating their experiences, because if we go into the community and we can't stay with them the way Stephen's practice is, then we've taken knowledge away from them and for only our benefit. That's not allowed. Harvard has a center that sets the rules for this, and they have office hours, and I have suggested to some faculty to visit with them to see what's within our bounds. I think it'll be great to have a conversation after the conference, because I do think this is now pervasive.
Yeah, I mostly would concur. And I would just add, to state the obvious, that those professional associations are us. They're not they're not aliens that arrived from somewhere else, right? They are us. And I would argue that the leadership, actually, on the ASLA, certainly, I would argue in the AIA. I also been looking at the European professional groups. They are also seeing this. The challenges that we're facing as a planet, climate, ecological, social justice, democracy, these are not, nobody, you said this, so I don't think anybody in this room in a sane manner thinks it's somehow any one profession. I don't think public health folks are going to solve all the public health problems, right? We have got to, and I think the leadership is seeing it. But I think it's really important how we teach so that the students are also not just demanding it and asking it, but going in with some skills on how to do it and how to address it.
I also think the ASLA Climate Action Plan, which evolved 2 years ago by Pamela Conrad and others, but she was in the lead of it. I read the document, and we were at the CEO roundtable. We were trying to figure out, how do we convey to our colleagues out there in the field that we believe in something. And then we said, well, the ASLA Climate Action Plan is very good, and it creates a framework of the kind that my firm has now taken full account of our carbon footprint. We care about that. If we don't, we're kind of screwed. And other members of the roundtable are also doing this, including Sasaki. Sasaki's been leading in, let's say, decarbonizing the specification. So I think there's no turning back. There's credit to go around. I think I share with Thaisa the belief that ASLA leadership has really turned a corner, and they're on it.
I want to hear from Dennis, just in terms of from the firm's perspective, the professional association.
I can start. I mean, it's something constant in our mind. If you look at the firm, we're still operationally organized according to disciplines. So when someone is hired, someone is interviewed, Stephen Gray were interviewed by different people. So we still use that as a operational platform, including bonuses, promotion, everything. But that doesn't stop us from collaborating. Again, as I mentioned, over 17 years, I've never worked on one single project with one single discipline. And also, just culturally, it's such a diverse environment, and the same as as the world. You'll always interact with the people with very different background, different interests, different expertise. So to me, I don't think that's a conflict. And also, I wanted to mention earlier, collaboration relies on shared interest, curiosity, and vocabulary. So it can be as nuanced as just technical jargons to how you communicate with the community, with the lay person. So in the profession or in the professional environment at Sasaki, and I want to just thank one special group. It's called Sasaki Strategists. They develop a lot of really innovative tools that really bridge the gap among disciplines, as well as the gap between professional practitioners and the community members. So that can enable really diverse, deep input from the community. Whether it's a campus or it's a community we're working with in Boston. So I think that I'm really hopeful with new technology, with the stronger consensus of all the bigger issue, societal issue around the globe, as way beyond one discipline, way beyond one region. I think I'm optimistic.
I would just say, from a very personal point of view, as an urban designer, there is no urban design professional organization. So it's never been a focus of mine, while I respect the ASLA and the AIA and those organizations. I remember when I first became president, I got invited to the CEO roundtable of the AIA. And we went to the headquarters in Washington, and each person spoke for a few minutes. And the more I listened, the more I thought, what on earth am I doing here? They are just completely off base as to what a creative practice is all about. And I think I said that. And I never went back. But, being at the GSD and then being exposed to Sasaki, when I was at the GSD, I was just as interested in what was going on at the Kennedy School. I went to many lectures at the Harvard Law School, saw many famous people, from people involved in Watergate to President of Zimbabwe. Once spoke there, and I went to these things. I saw David Hockney talk in the Carpenter Center, of all places. So just getting beyond my world and getting exposed to all these areas in an environment, in an office, in a university, in a society, I think is just so critical.
So that's wonderful. Thank you all. We need to wrap up. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank the audience. If you're interested in this conversation and continue to kind of think through what is radical collaboration, we do have an amazing symposium this Friday in our downtown office at Sasaki, The Future of Collaborative Design, with deep dives really into civic technology, as we were talking about earlier, working with city representatives, municipalities, and governments. What does that mean? Working with communities, thinking about youth design and that next generation of those who are going to come into the profession or be activists or advocates in their communities. We have a great lineup of folks. Maurice Cox, who's here today, is a Bloomberg Fellow and has worked with the city of Detroit and Chicago and mayor of Charlottesville. And he will kick us off with our keynote. We are also joined by Mayor Wu's chief of staff, as well as the deputy chief of urban design, and a lot of different leaders from the city of Somerville, as well as Cambridge. So it's going to be a wonderful day that you can check out. Again, thank you all so much for being here tonight. We hope you had a good time listening to all these wonderful people, and we wish you a great evening. Thank you.